Well, Apple has been hit with a nearly $2 billion fine by the European Union for breaking its competition laws. The EU says the tech giant prioritized its own music streaming service over others. Rival app Spotify had complained Apple put it at a disadvantage by not letting it tell iPhone customers about subscription deals. This is the first ever penalty against Apple levied by the EU. The EU has led global efforts to crack down on big tech companies. For more on this, we're joined live now by tech analyst Carmi Levy. Carmi, thanks so much for joining us. This battle has been brewing for years now. Break this down for us. What's been going on between Spotify and Apple?
Yeah, Spotify launched its first complaint in 2019, basically saying Apple was making it difficult for consumers to find its services outside of Apple's ecosystem for less money, and that they were kind of blocking Spotify's ability to set up alternate ecosystems, charging Spotify what they call the 30% Apple tax. Apple takes a 30% cut of everything that flows through the App Store. So, this goes back, if we followed other cases like Apple versus Epic. This is always at the core of it. But this is the first time that the EU has used its new Digital Markets Act to essentially tell a big American company, the way you do business doesn't cut it. This is a monopoly. This is antitrust behavior, and it's going to cost you big time, and you better change your behaviors, or it's going to cost even more next time. So this is Europe essentially digging in its heels and telling Apple that this needs to end, and it needs to end now.
I want to talk about what that means, what that message means for consumers, for listeners who are, of course, looking for more competition when the EU cracks down on big tech companies like this and says no more monopoly. How does that benefit the user?
In the long term, it could open the door to consumers paying less for subscription services to streaming platforms like Spotify, because right now Spotify is bound by Apple's kind of infrastructure. And if you want to provision or if you want to subscribe to Spotify through Apple's devices, you're going to pay more for it. What this does is it opens the door to making it easier that, well, if you don't want to get Spotify through Apple's App Store, you can get it another way, and Apple cannot stop Spotify from doing that, cannot make it harder for consumers to work their way around. So at the end of the day, it means more choice for consumers if they use Apple products for other products from other providers. But also it means that better competition. So you may have more choice because maybe there are other companies like Spotify that have not been able to build a viable business model the way things used to be. But as Apple loosens those rules, perhaps they will now come into the market. Consumers will have more choice.
So obviously, Apple is a powerhouse, a tech giant, so I'm sure it can afford this fine. From an optics perspective, though, how much will it hurt, this fine hurt the company? And I want to get your thoughts on Apple planning to appeal this decision.
Yeah, Apple has made it very clear it doesn't agree with this decision. It says that its behavior is entirely legal, and that they ensure the way they do business already ensures adequate competition, and there are all sorts of options for consumers as well as competing companies. So I would expect that the lawyers are already drafting up the appeal as we speak, and this will be working its way through the European Union's process for years to come. But I think the good news here is that even though Apple can easily afford to pay this, they're sitting on hundreds of billions of dollars in cash. It sends a very clear message to Apple that you can't keep behaving this way because it will step up from that $2 billion. The provisions for the Digital Markets Act allow for fines up to 10% of global revenues of a company, which in Apple's case would be huge. And if you do it again within 8 years, 20%. So Europe means business here, and they've always been fairly leading edge on tech legislation like this. And those costs could escalate if Apple wants to take this to the mat.
Carmi, I'm sure this happens all the time. Does this remind you of any other cases, a time when other massive companies tried to limit competition and tried to maybe be a little sneaky?
Certainly. I mean, a generation ago when we were all just getting into the internet and Microsoft decided to bundle Internet Explorer in with Windows, and Microsoft ultimately lost that battle. But the thing is, and so they were forced to open up the ecosystem to other competing companies. But it took so long for that case to work its way through the courts that by the time it did, all the other competitors really couldn't compete anymore. Microsoft lost the battle, but they won the war. And so I think Apple knows this. They can just keep spending and spending and spending on legal challenges to this, knowing full well that time is on their side, not on the side of consumers.
So interesting. Tech analyst Carmi Levy, always good to have you on the show. Thanks so much for your perspective on this.
Appreciate being here, Lena. Thank you.